Welcome to Couchside Journalism with Jeffrey Stevens. For Social Media and Society, my topic was sports, and I went with fantasy sports, and thus the magic wand here. So to get into it, what are fantasy sports? They're a big game. I'll just breeze over as I would with the presentation here. A big game, also known as rotisserie sports, where individual people, so me, you, anybody, pick one or two players from each team and compile a team from that. Then we track the players' stats throughout the season, and then throughout the season we compile those stats against each other's, the fantasy players, and whoever has better points wins as far as their fantasy league. So a lot of people just pick one player here, one player here, one player there, fantasy team, stats, points, that's the game. What's all the hype about? Well, it started with bored sports journalists in the late 1920s who started compiling baseball stats. Baseball stats got fun when they were bored, so they started compiling them and betting about them, so thus the game. It started as called rotisserie sports, now it has evolved into it. But the fantasy hype went crazy with technology, believe it or not, and social media. So, the craze began, and this is an article here, it will take too long to probably download and get to it, but from Rutgers.com about how technology spurred off fantasy sports and just really put a hype and thrust to them. All fantasy all the time. Teenagers, grandmothers, as mentioned before, Joe, Bob, or Billy is into fantasy sports now. Because you don't really have to be about a team or about a sport. You just it's another way to bet. You play your odds. You get one player here, one player there, one player there. Anybody who knows anything about stats or about numbers can play the game. So you don't have to be a sports buff or anything like that. The organization Baseline for fantasy sports, that's all over even ESPN, is running 30 million strong, and this is a link for FSTA.org, the Baseline organization for fantasy sports. Is all this fantasizing safe? I put a link to the actually textbook definition for fantasizing to give us a clear definition of what it is, and it can be living in a dream world, so we can be living in a dream world. We possibly need a line as to how much we can do this, and could this actually interfere with our day-to-day lives? Like we address with social media in our class all the time, could this also intertwine with social media and all this fantasizing disconnect us from reality? Could a lot of this, with this gentleman here, which I've seen working in many sports restaurants and places myself, and this is the extension of what I mentioned earlier of anybody getting into it and it being so accessible online. One guy keeping tabs on numerous different sports, numerous different places at the same time because he's got bets going on each one. So could a lot of this, or a lot of this, computer on top of computer on top of computer, lead our minds like this? Fantasy Central. Or can fantasizing too much account for people blurring lines in reality? So, if we're living in fantasy here, do we lose touch with reality to the point where we're living so much in fantasy that we don't see the real reality before us and maybe start judging it differently? Oh, Obama's this, Obama's that, but we're in La La Land. If not being realistic from the beginning, a fantasy can go quickly from good to bad. Sounds great, good, great, grand, wonderful. Oh no, end of the world, apocalypse. Not much of an in-between. So, possibilities of fantasy sports. Like Keenan Starkey, there can be both good and bad to all of this with all the technology and our day-to-day lives. Many who never cared about sports now really do care about them and are betting. So not only is this isn't small potatoes, this is people betting millions and millions of dollars and using a lot of social media to get onto it. Fantasizing sports has also kind of started cheating on itself. A lot of people, even in the fantasy world, now that they can be behind the digital curtain, start fantasizing actually, or using fantasy sports to just bet on the house and not bet against each other. So people are disconnecting with other people in the fantasy land already. And not all fantasy is good. Some people are twisted. Some people want to take advantage. That could easily be what's going on here. Why make ourselves susceptible to it? Just play on it a little bit, but not too crazy. And if not careful, you know, we could turn into digital people. But not using precaution with it could lead to some blurring of reality. And, you know, we don't want to make it so that our computer reality is our only one. And that's what I want to wrap up with here as to social media and its connection with sports and fantasy sports connection with everything. A very fun game, a very interesting, fast-paced game that everybody can get in on, but one that, just like technology, should be taken, rationed, and gone about before we do end up too much in La La Land and forgetting about what's right in front of our face. Thank you, Dr. Riley.